Is there a strategy that'll help you grow your company faster? CEO Sales Strategies is an investigative business podcast for entrepreneurial people who never stop asking questions. Highly acclaimed sales revenue growth expert Doug C. Brown interviews CEOs, business owners, and professionals who serve them to uncover and share actionable tips and methods behind their bulletproof sales strategies. Topics covered on the show include their failures, struggles, secrets, and processes that help them succeed in selling millions to billions of dollars of their products and services, all with the sole aim of helping you grow your business. If you are eager to know the most effective sales secrets from the A players of the game, then the CEO Sales Strategies podcast is certainly the place to be.
Hey, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. I got a great guest for you today. His name is Professor Pete Alexander. He wrote a book called Lighten Your Day, and I brought him on here because I want to title this, Manage Your Stress, Manage Your Business. There's a difference between different levels of stress in the business, and if you're in negative stress, which is distress, right, then your business is going to be also in distress. Now, you might go, Doug, that's crazy. That wouldn't happen. Well, there's lots of evidence to support it. We're going to talk about it in this podcast together, Pete and myself. Here's the thing. You could be in what's called eustress as well. Pete brought that up, which is positive stress, right? And so that is a good thing. That'll promote and grow your business. And again, we'll give you very different types of reasons why and kind of some case studies out of that process. So without further ado, let's go talk to Pete and let's get your day less stressed. Pete, welcome to the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. I'm very grateful you're here.
Doug, thank you for having me on the show, and I really appreciate your listeners' time as well.
We always have a great conversation every time you and I talk, so I'm very happy. Today, we're going to talk about Lighten Your Day, basically, as a book, what you wrote. And the reason I asked all of you listening, the reason I asked Pete to come on here was we're going to talk about stress. And I know none of you have it, but we're going to talk about it anyways. So we're going to talk about what good stress is, what bad stress is, where's the blurred line, right? So Pete, what is stress really when it comes down to it? Like, what would be a definition of stress?
I think everybody has their own definition, depends on how you react to it. But basically, in general, it's a negative reaction we have to something that would be considered a challenge. So most commonly, we'll have this come up when it's with our finances, maybe our career job or our business, especially if you're thinking about when we're talking about sales, because, we're always under the gun to make our numbers, right? And so that is going to be a stress for us, whether it's on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, an annual basis, et cetera. Or it could be something family related, where we have challenges, especially those of us as parents. We know what a challenge can be with children, but also, I'm part of the sandwich generation, and I had to take care of my mom and my dad, who didn't properly, manage their finances and needed financial help as well. So it's any of those can be cause us stress, and the challenge is trying to be able to manage that. And I know that we always hear about work-life balance. I don't really believe in that specific term because each one of us needs to find whatever that balance is. Some of us, that really love our careers, we can be 90% work, and that's okay. As long as the stress that we're facing is the good stress versus the negative stress. Those are that's the critical fine line as you mentioned, Doug.
So let's talk about good stress, because a lot of people, when they think of stress, they think, "Oh my gosh, this is negative.
Mm-hmm.
It's the worst thing ever." I haven't always found that, quite frankly. Even in sales, a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, sales is stressful." Yeah, if you make it that way, right? If we feel when somebody says no that it's the end of our existence, or if but I've never seen anybody's head burst into flames when somebody said no, like a CEO or a business owner says no across the table. So, but a lot of people take it internally. So
Yeah.
is stress that we take internally a bad thing, a good thing? So I guess a better question would be, what the heck is good stress? Really, when it comes
Sure.
down to it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The good stress, there's actually a word called eustress. It's spelled eustress, eustress, and that is good stress. And where that is let's go back to let's say you mentioned earlier that sales isn't necessarily a stressful thing. Exactly. If you love your career, and you have to hit your numbers, of course. But if you love your career, you're passionate about your career, eustress is good stress that helps us get things done, helps us hit our numbers, helps us make sure that we do whatever we need to do to get to wherever we want to be. That is perfectly fine because good stress helps us get things done. What we want to avoid is what's commonly referred to as distress, distress. That is, in my experience, comes in two flavors. One is ruminating about something in the past. This is commonly something like guilt, where we might be guilty about something we either did or didn't do in the past. And we continue to churn and let that beat ourselves up when the reality is we can't do anything about the past because guess what? It's in the past. What we can do is learn the positive learnings from that and move forward. So if we can not, continue to churn about the past, and then the other flavor is anxiety about something that may or may not happen in the future. And a classic example of this would be imagining, okay, we have to give a presentation to a big group and it's an important presentation, let's say to the board of directors or something like that. And you're nervous as can be, which, nervous in a presentation is a good thing because that means you're excited about it. But if you start imagining that it's going to go terribly, why are you doing that? That's the thing, because it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And what is amazing is that I've seen this time and time again. When somebody worries about a future event that hasn't happened and they worry about the worst case scenario over and over again, what ends up happening is they manifest that
Mm.
because they're sending that negative energy out there. Instead, what I always suggest to people is think about, like, if we're talking about a presentation, imagine 5 seconds after you've finished your presentation and you get a huge applause, a standing ovation, maybe. Imagine that. And that is going to send a much better energy as you're getting ready for that presentation. So it's all mindset. It really is, because what the negative aspects that we get from stress, the long-term effects that we end up having on our body is often from the work that we're doing in our mind, thinking negatively about a certain situation. Continuous anxiety, continuous worrying, and that's just not healthy for us.
Makes a lot of sense. So we're speaking with Professor Pete Alexander. Now I know why you own a plant company.
Mhm.
Right? Because you own a company called Office Plants by Everything Grows, and it's gotta be calming as all can be to be around these plants all the time. And so but there's stuff that goes wrong in the business, I'm sure, right?
Yep,
Right.
absolutely.
So is that good stress or bad stress? Or
Well, so it's interesting. So the example that I like to give, I mean, it happened to me. So, I've, like most people, dealt with stress all my life, and I grew up in a very dysfunctional family and did a really good job of trying to ignore my stress, or and put it, not let it affect me. But at a certain point, it finally did. And for me, it was back in 2008, because I've owned Office Plus by Everything Grows since 2005. And in 2008, I had this perfect storm of stressful activities that were going on. And, one of which was the business needing all of my attention. I had all my employees want my attention, et cetera. And what ended up happening is that I first lost 30 pounds in 30 days. And I
Whoa.
was thinking to myself, wow, at first, I was in my mid 40s. I thought to myself, this is fantastic. I haven't lost weight since my 20s.
Right.
And, because I wasn't doing any special diet, I wasn't doing anything different with my exercise routine. And, but the pounds kept coming off. And sure enough, I finally, after that 30th pound, I had my blood work done and ding, 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 winner, winner, winner. I'm stress-induced diabetes. But what happened is before that, I wasn't listening to my body giving me the early warning signals. The classic ones for us, if we have a lot of back and shoulder stiffness or, more frequent headaches than we normally would have, or maybe indigestion that we normally wouldn't have so often, those are the kind of things that our body gives us these early warning signs. And unfortunately, when we ignore those signs, our bodies have to keep ramping it up until something really breaks. And for me, what happened was I get this diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes in 2008. Of course, don't listen to my body about what stress is doing to it. And I do the classic entrepreneur thing. I keep burning the candle at both ends for another 10 years until I end up in the emergency room with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for your listeners who don't know what that is, basically, my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And the crazy thing about this is that when I was admitted into the ER, the doctors told me I was 1 hour from being comatose. And my blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read my numbers. They were so high. It just said high. So the lab did a estimation that my blood sugars were 8 to 10 times higher than normal. And that it's so for me, and it's very interesting. Whenever I let stress start churning inside of me, my blood sugars skyrocket. And that's my indicator. And so that's a really good one now. I've got diabetes for the rest of my life. The one positive that I've got from that is a constant reminder that, hey, if I'm stressed out and my numbers are very high, I got to do something to get myself back into more normal range.
Wow. So for those of you who are listening who go ketoacidosis, that can be death,
Mhm.
really, when it comes
Yes, it
down to
can.
it. Just
Yes, it can.
so wow, that's really close. When you have a medical background, which I do, right, and I hear
Mhm.
ketoacidosis, I'm like, oh, right. It's like, wow, you
Mhm.
were getting pretty close. So okay, so how do we distinguish? Because everybody, well, first we're speaking with Professor Pete Alexander. He wrote a book called Lighten Your Day, and it's really about how to give examples how to have stress release. All right, release the stress
Mhm.
within a few minutes. And you're a stress release specialist. I always wondered why you were, because we've had several conversations, but now I totally get it. Right?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
like you don't. I mean, that's a big slap wake up call right then and there. You either get
Yeah,
it or you don't. And if you don't, well, you and I probably wouldn't be talking right now. Um,
that's exactly right. Yeah, it was this epiphany moment for me in the hospital because I realized that if I didn't do something about it now, I wasn't going to be around much longer. And that was, again, back in 2018. And here's the crazy thing, the absolute crazy thing. After I got out of the hospital, I started applying different stress relief tools and techniques. And not only did, I see my stress go down, and my blood sugars go down, my weight went down, my energy went way, way up. And if you see a picture of me, if you saw a picture of me, Doug, back in 2008 when I first got diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes, and you see a picture of me or look at me right now, I look younger today than I did 14 years ago, with the
mm,
exception of a little bit more gray hair. But otherwise, it's crazy. And it's almost like figuring out how to deal with the stresses positively is like finding the fountain of youth.
It makes a lot of sense. I have a couple examples in my life, which I'll share as we go along. But, I was looking at you, I'm going, what gray hair, Pete? It's like, so now there's always a blurred line between what's healthy and not healthy. But when we can get into, you called it eustress, right? Eustress?
Yes, eustress, the positive stress.
How does this affect growing a company? Because I can imagine people sitting here go, Doug, this is kind of, Pete, this is kind of interesting, but this is CEO Sales Strategies business growth program. Like, so, how does stress affect my business negatively or positively?
Oh, easily. So think about it this way, depending on how many people you have reporting directly into you, if you're not managing your stress well, it could be any number of things that could affect the business. First and foremost, imagine if you physically or mentally burn out. That's the thing that you got to go right to that, because that's a clear issue that business owners have to think about. Because if you physically or mentally burn out because of your stress, you're not going to have any energy to do anything. You're probably going to only have energy to lie in bed or maybe watch TV. And that's about it. And if so imagine, like if you've ever had a really bad flu, that's a classic example of it, because when we have the flu, okay, we can't really have any energy to do anything. We just want to lie in bed. And if all we have energy for is to lie in bed, guess what? We're no good to our business. We're no good to our family. We're no good to anything. We barely can just, be able to take care of ourselves if we're lucky. So on the extreme end of it, business owners have to realize that if you do not take your health if you take your health for granted, there are going to be ramifications of that. And that is the first, at top level, what could happen to your organization. But let's say that you're lucky enough not to experience burnout. But when you're stressed, what ends up happening, especially when you're working with people, so whether it's your employees, whether it's your peers, etc., you're going to have less patience, less empathy for those around you. And what happens is that if you are not being able to be collaborative with those people or be able to clearly lead them without attacking them because you have no patience anymore, then what ends up happening is you become the leader that everybody wants to run from as opposed to follow. And that is a real big culture issue that your company would have to deal with.
And we've all dealt with people like that,
Oh, yeah.
even down to the doctor who has terrible bedside manner, right? And so I'll add a story to that. So I went through burnout. I went through professional burnout. So, I was the type of guy, worked 7 days a week, never took a vacation. 12 hours was like, you only work 12 hours a day. What's the matter with you? Right. That was me.
Yep.
Right. I was just driven. And, I reminded myself I had 2 little kids, that I wanted to have a better life. And I did the mission thing, and I did, hey, put down the dream board, and I did all that. And I went after it. It was a Friday night. Oh, by the way, I'll tell 2 stories. Both were on a Friday night.
Okay.
So first Friday night story is I get a call from my wife, and she says, hey, you coming home? I said, I got a couple client things to finish up. She goes, why don't you come home? Your daughter, who is less than a year old, we've been waiting up for you. And I said, yeah. She goes, Doug, it's 10 o'clock at night. I'm still at my desk, right? So I used to get up, Pete, 5:30, work, get home, kiss a couple people, go to bed. That was it. Get back up, do that same thing. And so she's like, hey, it's almost 10 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, well, fine. I'll wrap up. I'll be home in about half an hour. She goes, Doug, do you know what day it is today? And I said, what? I said, Friday, right? She goes, no, what's the date? I said, I don't know. She goes, Doug, it's your birthday. And we've been waiting here with your daughter to have a birthday party and you aren't here. All right. So on a personal level, when we get into the stress, because stress just drives us, right? Especially if it's negative. So you talked about the anxiety of the future. I always figured if I don't have the money, I'm screwed, right? That's because I grew up in a place where we didn't have money. So I figured money, is going to solve all the problems. So I'm just driving forth. But what I didn't realize is all this stress that I was driving forth about a year after that. Well, it wasn't even, that happened in March. And so this was November-ish, December. All of a sudden, I'm sitting at my desk again, 10 p.m. on a Friday night. And some words came through my head, and it was like a wave that went from the left to the right. And it said, "You're burnt." It literally, I heard it in my head, like, "You're burnt." And from that moment on, you were absolutely right, Pete. I couldn't get the motivation. I was tired all the time. I would work, and I would try to work and I just couldn't. And you know what? That lasted for over a year with me. And, I thought it was medically, something happened to me, or whatever. Right. But it turned out to be stress when it came down to it. So those of you who are saying, well, geez, hey, I'll brush it off. You're not going to brush it off forever if you're going into complete negative stress over and over and over. And I've worked with so many CEOs and so many business owners. They go through the same thing because they're just charging. Number one. Number two, to your point about they're going to be, I wrote down the word, they'll be a jerk, right? I literally wrote it down. Yeah. And we've all worked with people like that, or just short-tempered for whatever reason. And who the hell wants to be around somebody like that for a long period of time, right? Yeah. And so as we grow older, we want to be around that less. So what'll happen is that turnover in people that you're referring to, and that is expensive.
Very.
The worst offender of this I had was a client, and they had an 82% turnover rate of their employee base every year. They were turning over on average 82%. That's insane.
That is totally insane. I can't imagine that.
It all stemmed from the CEO and the way the CEO was running the company. So as soon as we fixed those issues, people stayed, they were happy, et cetera. Oh, by the way, their business grew from 48 million to 110 million in 2 years, right? So and the third thing I will say is that when somebody's in stress like that as a business owner, they start getting into scarcity thought. So they're no longer in abundance thought, and they're driving their business forward in an abundance mentality. So what do? They pull back on things that they should be pushing the pedal down. And the crazy part is, I have found, Pete, that they pull back usually on marketing and sales. Those are the two things that they primarily pull back on.
I know. Right?
So now we're all going into a recession. We all agree the recession's here. This is all going to be here. And so what happens when you get all this stress upon you as a business owner, you start pulling back on things. And it's the exact opposite of what we need to do in a recession in order to make our company grow for now into the future.
So, it's so funny that you say that. I mean, I'm always amazed at the companies that decide, okay, marketing and sales, that's just an expense. And so now we got to lower that expense. And it's like, but guess what? If you actually at least maintain what you have, if not grow a little bit more, put some more budget into it, you're going to take advantage of all the competitors who are cutting back, because you're going to be front and center to the prospects that you haven't hit yet. And so, it's crazy. And I think, to your point, that this scarcity, it also comes from business owners when they're so stressed. Their mind share, there's not much room there anymore to really think these things through. They just can't give as much mind share to it as they would when they're not as stressed. So they have to make these quick reactions. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Let's just reduce the cost of marketing here. Let's reduce the cost of sales here. That's easy. Boom. Let's just get that done without really thinking it through.
Yeah. And it's the thing that bites them in the ankles, and they don't realize it until later on down the line. And all of a sudden their competition's pulling ahead of them, and they're like, what happened?
Right? Exactly.
And, and then their employees start going to the competition and they start getting hired. I had a software company that was doing the exact same thing. He was just wasn't showing up. He was just so stressed out all the time. And so along comes this company was in South America. So along comes American companies now looking to hire good people from other countries, right? And now they're doubling their salary to come. And so it's just an easy decision for the employees. It's like, I'm not happy here. This person's, not showing up for meetings. They're capping off. They're doing this. You know what? And somebody's offering me twice what I'm getting today. Goodbye. And, it's just that's what happened. So, fortunately it got turned around, but it took a little bit of not a little bit, it took actually a fair amount of what we would say, come to put your deity in there, conversations, right? About that. What I have found is stress typically comes from habitual behaviors that are learned in childhood. Is that where you?
Very commonly. Yes. Yeah. And so one of the most common ones is the basically a fear of authority figures. So that one's thinking about that as a business owner. If you've got any employees who are doing everything they can to try and get you to pat them on the back and to recognize them, that's typically a learned behavior that they've had as children. And you don't have to be just constantly doing it, but if that is a real value that somebody has, that they want to be recognized for their good work, and every employee wants to be recognized in some way. Some may not want to be publicized in front of a group, because that might be embarrassing to them. So you do a one-on-one, or you send them an email or something like that. Others who really want that public recognition, it's always something to be able to acknowledge them. It doesn't take a lot. It just, I remember earlier in my career, I had a supervisor who was really good about whoever came up with a particular idea. He would acknowledge them in the meetings. He says, "Oh yeah, so so-and-so came up with this idea, and I think this is going to be something good." It was really nice to just have that acknowledgement. And and that's something I carried. We learn from the best. Actually, I say we learn from the best people that we've been mentored by, and we also learn from the worst ones.
That's true. That is true. We do. We go, I don't want to be that.
That's exactly it. Well, in fact, my parenting skills, I can't tell you how many times with my kids when they were really young, where I would sit there and go, now, what would my mom or my dad have done in this situation? And I often did something different.
Right. Yeah, do the opposite, because it didn't work with us, right?
Exactly.
And that communication that you're talking about, just giving praise in whatever capacity that the person's looking to accept it in, right? We can ask people and say, hey, look, I want to acknowledge you. How do you feel comfortable, right, doing that? And by the way, those of you who are listening saying, well, is that really that important? Yes, it is. Don't find out the hard way. And I remember when I was first starting to date my wife, and she handed me a book called The Love Languages.
Oh, yes.
Right. And she said, read this. And I'm like, okay. And I read it and I was like, oh, wow. Okay. This is kind of interesting. Right. Because, I wanted to continue to date her. She told me to read this. I figured there was a reason behind it. I didn't ask at the time. And then we got together and she said, what language am I? Right. And it turns out that she is the type that verbally needs to have reinforcement, if you will. That's her love language on a verbal basis. So I remind myself on a consistent basis just to tell her how special she is.
Yep.
So here's my challenge to everybody on the podcast that's listening, Pete, because do you stop telling or showing your significant other how special they are? Do you stop going out on dates? Right. And if you do, what's going to happen to your relationship down the line?
Right. Right.
So people will go, well, of course, I'm going to continue to do that. Or if I haven't done that, my God, I'm going to do it tonight because bing, that's kind of stupid not to now that I know that I'm supposed to, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm speaking mostly about men, but the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, women do it as well. And so the relationship kind of wanes and peters out. And then over time, bad things happen, right? Just like the bad things happen to you and your over time, you like I neglected it for another 10 years or so, and boom, here I am, right? Um, but people don't believe that the same principles apply sometimes to business. And I think what they forget is you don't have employees, you have human beings with titles.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So human beings have feelings, wants, needs, desires. They grew up in a certain way. If you understand who they are, you can help alleviate stress in your organization as well as not even having the stress for yourself. Because sometimes what I've found, and I'm interested to hear your thought on this, is if I take care of sometimes the ranks, and the CEO or the business owner now has a reporting mechanism coming to them where they could see what's going on, some of their stress kind of settles down anyways. So we can hit stress from the executive level all the way through all other levels in a company, and that correct me if I'm wrong, should improve productivity, efficiency, certainly, having everybody have better days.
Absolutely. There's a couple different things that from an organizational standpoint that can be done. If you have a smaller team, I've always been a big fan of doing for each person in the team to have a personality a tool that each person does the personality tool so that everybody else knows their preferable way of interacting, talking, etc. So one of the and there's a free tool online, 16personalities.com, where you can go in there and literally each person can take it and they'll get their 4-letter acronym about what type of personality they have. And there's nothing, sharing it among the group, there's nothing controversial in there. So it provides everyone a little bit better information on, oh, okay, so like, Doug, if you and I were working together and I knew that you tended to prefer an extroverted, conversation, or like, let's say, being acknowledged in public to the rest of the team, that's great for me to know that versus an introvert who may not want that. So right. That's the kind of information there. The other one that is extremely powerful for a team to do, and this is from the leader, the CEO, and down the ranks from every title, is to do a values exercise, a personal values exercise for each person based on what they want out of their career. Because what happens is when you can clearly determine through literally, I have an exercise I use that takes 10, 15 minutes at the most to do, to identify the top 5 values as it relates to your career. What ends up happening is that any time that you have an important decision that has to be made as it relates to your career. So let's say if it's the business owner, is he or she thinking about buying a competitor business, or maybe is considering selling, or maybe is considering hiring another person in that's going to be a big part of the organization. Something that's an important decision like that should always be run by your personal values, and make sure that that decision is in alignment with those top 5 values. Because if that decision is not in alignment with those top 5 values, I guarantee you're going to add additional stress to yourself because you're not being true to yourself. And I can, I can provide a link to that activity that people can do on their own, that we can put in the show notes if you want, Doug.
Absolutely. That would be great. I really appreciate that, Pete. We're speaking with Professor Pete Alexander. He owns a company called Office Plants by Everything Grows. He is a stress elimination or reduction expert. I'm going to call it that.
Yep.
And this has been an extremely interesting conversation because I've been writing lots of notes, right? I'm like, oh, top 5 values, Doug, take that one, right? Because and I always bring it back to human interaction, because if you have two people, one has a value of family first and one has a value of family seventh, right? And they have a family together, I guarantee there's going to be a ton of stress in that situation, right? So when we're hiring people, when we're looking to hire top-notch, like what I call elite sales professionals, right? When we're looking to hire them, we have to look at their value set as well to see if they fit culturally into the organization. Because if the organization is this, what I would call a pit bull mentality, where it's just like take no prisoners, sell at any cost, and then you try to put somebody in who's, I don't know, a Labrador retriever, so to speak, right? Who's just like, mellow, kicks back, whatever. They're not going to be happy in that situation, even if they're a top producer, and they'll flushed out. And so we want to look at those alignment of values. I want to transition before we go to your book, because your book's cool.
Oh, thank you. Yep. Lighten your day right there.
Lighten your day. There you go. So where can people get it, or where's the best place to get it?
Best place is on Amazon. That's where it's available, both on Kindle version, an audiobook, or the printed version.
Exercises that are in there, they're not onerous, right? I mean, they take a few minutes, right?
No, the whole intent of the book, and there's over 100 exercises in there. The whole intent of the book, when I started looking for different books on stress relief after I got out of the hospital, I noticed that they were all these 200 to 300 page books that basically talked about the theory of stress, or maybe one or two activities. I mean, who has the time to read a 300-page book on meditation? Right. So the reality is most of us are going to have 5 minutes or less to be able to try and calm ourselves down. And so 95% of the exercises in that book literally take 5 minutes or less. And so what's great about that is twofold. One, it doesn't take long to try something. And if it works, fantastic. Run with it. Use it as often as you can. If it doesn't work, big deal. You spent a couple minutes trying it.
Right.
Try another one next time. That's the thing, because what might work as a great tool for you, Doug, may not work as great for me, and vice versa. So we have to find what works for ourselves. And that is the whole intent, is you just have a whole bunch of different ones. You're not supposed to try them all. You can if you want. Most people, what they do is when they find one or two that work for them, they use them on a daily basis. And that's the real key. If we can do 1 to 2 minutes a day of stress relief, the compound benefits over time will be enormous. We just got to start today. We can't say, oh, I'll do it tomorrow or next week or next month, because we'll never get to it that way.
Right. Yeah. What's the law of diminishing intent, which, states, what is it? The longer you wait to do something you're supposed to, the higher the probability it'll never get done, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Well, Pete, thanks for being here on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. I know everybody got a lot out of this. I know I got a lot out of this. So again, very grateful to have you here. And thanks again.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for having me on the show. And again, I greatly appreciate the listeners' time, and hopefully this was helpful for them.
All right, lighten your day. I think that's a positive thing for everybody to do, right? Let's lighten our days. How do we do that? We get rid of the distress that's going on in our lives. There are exercises that we can do to reduce that. There are exercises we can do over time that eliminate that. And so the things that we are stressed out about, we don't become stressed over any longer. And, we want to get rid of that distress and get into good stress, or as Pete coined it, eustress. Didn't even know that word existed prior to. So I recommend you check out the book. By the way, the values thing he's talking about is huge, right? Because it's huge in the regard of creating positive momentum, forward growth in your business. When people are all on the same value set, stress just kind of melts off. I mean, it's not, not going to go away because you're always going to have certain things in the business. But the reality is that when you don't have interpersonal conflict going on, that helps in a big way. And you'd be surprised. It's much better for your clientele, and it's much better for the employees, and therefore it's much better for you. Even if you have people who are outsourced and you look at their values, and you say, okay, I'm using certain vendors, for example, and they're driving me nuts. Why? Usually it's a values conflict. That is what I found it to come down to. So grab his book, go do some exercises, reduce your stress. You'll make decisions now, not from scarcity, but from an abundance place. So you'll play more win-win. You won't worry and ruminate about the past issues as much, or maybe at all. You won't go into anxiety as quickly and worry about what the potential outcomes will be. Reducing your overall stress, and please take it from somebody who has burnt out. You don't want to go there. When you burn out, that's it. And no matter what you try to do, you just can't. It's the weirdest thing I can ever tell you happened in my life. So if you like this subject matter and you have some other subject matter, you're like, oh my gosh, I wish we had an expert come in on this, or you're an expert on that, reach out to us by email at youmatter@ceosalesstrategies.com. That's YOUMATTER. Let us know what your idea is. We'll respond back to you either way. And if it's great, we'll do an episode on this, either get you that information with an expert, or if you're the expert, we'll interview you and see if it works between us. If you like anything that's going on here and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a great podcast, please do us a favor, give it a review, give it an honest one. If it's 5-star, hey, thank you. The more of those we have, the better the algorithms. Tell people about this if you would. Refer this to friends. Just say, hey, I listened to this, crazy guy, Doug Brown, on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast, and he had this episode or that episode. Check it out, right? Be very grateful if you would do so. And of course, if you want to get yourself or anybody or your company, your teams, to the top 1% in selling, in other words, in sales revenue growth, if you want to have people get in your organization or yourself into the top 1% earners globally, reach out to me. Or if you're looking to have people like that in your company on the sales side, I'm looking to have elite professional salespeople who are 1% earners work for you, reach out to us as well. My direct email is doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. LinkedIn is Doug Brown 123. And the phone number here is 603-595-0303. And as always, go out, sell something today, sell it profitably, sell a lot of it, play win-win, make people happy, make yourself happy, and have a better today and a better tomorrow, and just reduce your stress overall. Till next time, this is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. To your success. Okay, guys, that works. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. What is something that you learned that you could act on today? Don't forget to schedule it now, or it may never get forward momentum. If you find our content valuable, please leave a favorable review and let us know what you liked. Please also share this with others if the content will help them. For our show notes, other episodes, and more interesting content and resources, please visit ceosalesstrategiespodcast.com. See you soon, and to your continued success.